Good afternoon. Thanks, everyone. Welcome to this Ask the Analyst session for Talent Acquisition Realities 2024 to 25. I'm Jon Kennard, Content Editor at Fosway Group, Europe's #1 HR industry analyst, and I'll be your host for today's session. So founded in 1996, Fosway Group provides in-depth corporate research on next-gen HR, talent and learning practices. We provide analyst and advisory services to more than 3,000 European and international headquartered multinationals and corporates, as well as independent vendor research and EMEA market commentary. Before we launch into the main body of the session, let me also take this moment to tell you about Fosway Corporate Membership. It's one of our newest services. It's an invite-only network for HR learning and talent leaders, offering privileged access to the data and insights that sit behind the 9-Grid and realities research, as well as automatic booking privileges for our roundtable program and the opportunity to book exclusive time with a member of our analyst team as well. There's lots more besides that. Do contact us if you're interested in learning more. There'll be some contact details and a bit more information at the end. So in only its third year, Fosway's TA Realities Research, in association with Recfest, the global leader in TA events, has already built a significant library of data and insight, exploring how TA teams are dealing with change. Obviously, in many cases, leading that change through an embrace of the latest developments in AI application. So I'm delighted to welcome lead analyst on this research, Dr. Sven Elbert, to dissect and discuss all the findings in this latest iteration of the Talent Acquisition Realities Research. Before I hand over to you, Sven, a couple of quick housekeeping notes. We're going to have the presentation about the infographics, and then we're going to have a long Q&A session at the end, but do post your questions throughout. I'll gather them up and then ask them in hopefully chronological order-ish to Sven afterwards. With that done, Sven, let's set the scene and talk about TA Realities 2024.
Yes, thanks, John, and welcome everybody as well. I was going to talk a little bit about the weather, but it is depressing, so let's just dive in. I guess, as I said, the research obviously is an EMEA-wide research program, a couple of hundred respondents. The majority is from larger enterprise organizations. Obviously, UK does play a significant role into that part of the equation as well. But it's really also quite a few respondents from France, Germany, and so on, and Nordics and Western Europe and so on. So I think even Americas, obviously, so I think it's quite an interesting data set that we have here, which we've basically published in 5 infographics with 5 key themes that you can see listed here. Obviously, we can't go through all of them in just this one session, and we have actually also included a few things that are not on the infographics to make this session actually worthwhile attending. And obviously, we can't cover everything, so also make sure that you do download the infographics, because there will be some topics that we don't necessarily cover here in this webinar session explicitly. If you have particular questions, if you've seen them maybe already, definitely feel free to ask around those as well. I think an interesting one is the 6x that you can see in the blue on the number 4, which is an interesting statistic that talks about what type of talent acquisition solution people find particularly success with. So I think that's one that we won't cover here, but certainly the infographic has some great details around that. So definitely make sure to check those out. And with that, maybe let's dive into the strategies. So as obviously we need to root this a little bit in the economic situation. Probably the last 1 to 2 years, 18 months, depending on the territory within Europe, the country within Europe, haven't been the greatest necessarily for talent acquisition teams. The economic pressures have definitely trickled through. There's Germany obviously is suffering probably the most in terms of the economic downturn, hiring freezes in a lot of areas. The sector that still, or the sectors that still continued, were high volume industries around retail, obviously, hospitality, healthcare, those kind of sectors obviously continue to hire despite some obviously economic challenges. But definitely across the board, talent acquisition teams have felt significantly more pressure to show value for their organization. And for sure, also, there were many organizations who had obviously to reorganize the team, think about efficiencies and so on. What is from a European perspective has always been true that, quality of hire definitely was something which is like always a bit more important than in the US, where it's a different labor market and different dynamics around that. But particularly during these times, it is really important to hire the right person into the role. So companies have focused much more on quality. But at the same time, candidate experience continues to be really, really important, making sure you have a frictionless process, that you really get back to candidates quickly, that you keep a close communication loop going on, and other things around the technology. Maybe some of the technology side aspects of that are also quite important in terms of career side and process and workflows and those kind of things, is what many TA teams have focused on as well during this period, and also looking to do so in 2025. Speed, which in a growth period is obviously much more important, has declined significantly in priority. There are obviously industries where speed continues to be really important, but this is an observation that obviously applies more to EMEA than emerging markets, where, like India or the Philippines, where hiring is still and speed is obviously really important. But in Europe, it's a bit less obviously important now. And really making sure that companies find the right hire is at the top of the priority list. And we will see what that impact has on some of the instruments and tools that companies are going to be selecting for 2025 as well. Moving on, there's also, in terms of how are companies looking to adjust their resourcing, as you can see here, more focus on internal development and retention. So, this continues to be an important aspect to retain the talent that you have and give internal staff career opportunities. And TA teams are getting more and more involved, or have been getting more involved into those conversations there as well. A significant proportion, slightly more, have actually said that they would want to reduce full-time external hiring in the upcoming year, also in this year. We already are in 25, and 21% though are still continuing to look to hire more. So there's still obviously companies that want to increase hiring, but there's 3% more companies who have actually said, no, we're going to be having to reduce a little bit. So I think from that perspective, also no surprise that the budgets are under significant pressure. 40% say the things are going to decrease, the spend is going to decrease. And so it's really also a reflection of the economic situation. But in terms of investment, the area that is probably suffering the most is recruiting agencies, where spend for 66% of organizations is being reduced very significantly. Employer branding, TA technology continue to be relatively high up, so still see some investment. And interestingly as well, recruiting skills is getting more importance. For one, obviously there has been more turnover, more rehiring maybe of roles, of people into roles in the recruitment team themselves. So there's a bit of onboarding and enablement required for that. But also there's a lot of AI, new tools, new things coming out that people need to be upskilled on. So I think those are definitely things that companies are prioritizing for 2025 as well. Here we look at the things, obviously, when it comes to attracting and engaging with candidates, where organizations have said these are the top 6 things that they want to be doing slightly more of. So social network hiring, diversity, equity, inclusion, really being an employer that showcases that, and a very strong channel with a good cost-benefit ratio is employee referrals. So no surprise here that companies are wanting to put more effort into employee referrals, which, when you look at it, you always get really, if you have a good program that works, not every company has a good program that works, but if they have, then actually this can create really strong outcomes, particularly in an economic downturn. So definitely something that rightfully 54% have said that they would focus on. And yeah, I mean, you can see the other. So definitely the career side is still important. Internal mobility aligns with what we've seen on the other slide. So this is when it comes to attraction and engaging candidates. And on the next slide, we have the selection and hiring process. So linking back to the quality aspect that we had identified on one of the earlier slides, obviously no surprise to see that structured interview guidelines are one of the top things that companies are prioritizing for 2025. Obviously, making sure that you have better alignment between managers and recruiters on how to interview, that they have a clear guideline, better comparability, and so on. So that definitely is something also where a lot of the vendors actually have invested in the solution to give managers and recruiters the ability to, see these things on the screen. So I think that's definitely something which can be directly linked to the economic situation. Interestingly enough, electronic contract management, so signing the offer that you make to a candidate electronically, having them sign that electronically is also something where in an economic downturn where maybe the whole team is not so much focused on being on the phone and in active interview conversations with everyone, obviously it makes sense to, maybe turn on some of the functionalities that you maybe haven't used in your company before. And this is particularly one where you can gain really some significant efficiencies around, managing those contract signatures, putting the work contracts in, making the offer a digital process, and so on. So I think there is obviously for large organizations, there's quite a bit of complexity in that process because there's so many templates. And it is not something that you do overnight with a snip. So hence, obviously, good to see that now a lot of companies are using the time wisely to build out that part of the process a little bit more. And then, I mean, the other things, video interviewing obviously continues to be an important part of the selection process. We're still living in a hybrid world of work. Skill assessment, obviously, is an interesting one that has come up over the previous year. Skills-based hiring continues to be a trend. So obviously that means also that you need to have maybe some specific assessment tools for specific skills that you want to employ. So that is also something where companies are looking at. And also candidates, by the way, are able to use ChatGPT to, obviously improve the CV, tailor that CV maybe more to the job rec or the job description. And so having a bit of an impartial tool that actually assesses the skills a bit more objectively through a psychometric or task-based validation, where you actually have to put something into practice, is quite an interesting and good approach that some companies have found really good success with already in maybe the previous 2 years. And it's, I think, also good to see that this certainly is continuing into 2025 as well, if that makes sense. Yeah, obviously, so this was more the strategy and what kind of implications that has on TA priorities for the current year. The big topic is AI and why are companies turning towards AI? Obviously, I mean, if you move on to the next slide, last year, obviously, oh no, okay, so actually TA is leading the bunch in terms of all across the HR functions. So probably the most innovation in AI in the HR domain is in recruiting. Learning obviously also has a very significant impact, has felt a very significant impact through generative AI. And obviously our other studies around learning realities research have found some very significant findings. Definitely check out those as well if you're interested. But I mean, from the HR perspective, TA has always been the most innovative sector, always deploying the most innovative tools and everything. So I think it's no surprise that TA is also leading the bunch here. Moving on, it's increasing, right? The interest, the appetite, and also how it's already affecting TA function is expected to increase quite significantly. So we have seen a shift from maybe 8% who last year said, oh, it's impacting us already a great deal. Now it's almost 30%, almost a third, well, 27. Let's say, yeah, it's affecting us already now a great deal, right? And there's more is to be expected in the next coming year. We would expect that this shifts more to the right. The infographic also has some interesting findings around how this is affecting the talent acquisition teams. Is there maybe some automation possibilities, some headcount implications already? So I think that is something to definitely check out. We can maybe dip into that a little bit later if we want to as well, if you have particular questions around it. But definitely, you can expect that there's going to be a bigger impact as vendors are also obviously accelerating their roadmaps and putting more investment into improving and enhancing the scope and the sophistication of the AI capabilities within the software, within the TA suites. Moving on, what is driving adoption? So here, the survey participant, and this is a heat map, right? So green means a lot of folks have voted in that box, if you like, and red means not so many have voted. Pressure from stakeholders was not a major driver, so that is good news, I guess. Regulatory compliance was also not a major driver, surprise. But increased efficiency and improved candidate experience, and to a slightly lesser degree, also scalability and better quality of hires were driving adoption of AI into the TA teams. So I think that is definitely a significant and interesting aspect, that it is mostly around efficiencies. Certainly for one, it is around what the economy is demanding of us to show more value more quickly. So being more efficient, obviously, AI seems to be a good answer. And maybe it is easier then to create a business case for adding AI into your TA talent acquisition technology ecosystem as well, if you can then certainly have a stronger business case with it. Okay. However, it is not easy. Like obviously, we have seen EU legislation coming out. Some countries are obviously a bit more scared about adopting AI. The country where I live in, obviously, is leading the bunch in obviously skepticism. You almost need to have a long document, answer long surveys when you select a talent acquisition AI-based solution before you can even talk about benefits and functionality, right? It's really quite drastic, and France is maybe a little bit similar. The UK is not so, is probably more open to adopting it, but certainly all across the board, these are some of the challenges that everybody has found. So budget limits, obviously, clearly from the economic situation, GDPR and data security is definitely something as well. I think what has surprised me at first, but when you think about it, is actually not surprising, is system integration, right? So if you have a very fragmented ecosystem in HR and talent acquisition in particularly, then putting AI over it is more difficult if the things are not really lining up, and actually exposing the AI to those different systems is more difficult, right? So that is actually something, if you have a more disparate ecosystem or more fragmented ecosystem, definitely some companies are thinking more now, okay, should we consolidate? Should we bring things together a bit more so that we can actually leverage the AI for more workforce, for more use cases? So I think definitely that has been a barrier for a lot of companies with a fragmented ecosystem. So that is one category, the top three, I guess. And then the other category is obviously around reliability, understanding of AI, concerns around bias. So definitely those things continue to drive obviously a lot of questions that companies have to the vendors. We are seeing certifications coming up so that companies can actually, similar to, the early days of GDPR and data security, when companies were trying to get ISO 27001 certified, there's now ISO certifications that you can get for AI maturity and AI monitoring process. So I think that's an interesting one. And will help the entire industry as we see those standards being adopted more, making it easier for companies to make choices about solutions. So that will definitely be a plus. And then we have been diving really quite deep into the functionalities of what has been adopted in AI. And we've basically looked at it from two angles. One is candidate experience, which you see here. And this slide looks at what are companies currently implementing or considering to implement to improve the candidate experience in terms of AI. So, and then you see, programmatic advertising is there, interview scheduling is there, video interviewing that is not happening at the same time. Sorry, my English. And so I think those are the areas where companies have obviously prioritized it and have started to use it. But you can see also that a lot of companies maybe even haven't started to look at it yet. So you are not behind the curve if you haven't really looked at it yet. But on the other hand, I would say definitely start looking at it in 2025. The speed with which the innovation is coming is still very significant. So obviously making the first steps is really quite important. And when we go to the next slide, actually those companies that have adopted some of these AI infused applications actually have found really some good outcomes there as well. So there are the few first early success stories around, okay, programmatic advertising has worked for us, interview scheduling has had some very significant good effect on it. The career side chatbot is an interesting one here. That's the only one that is maybe a little bit more ineffective than one would expect. But keep in mind, many companies have invested in chatbot technology early on when those chatbots were maybe not based off of a large language model and maybe did have those natural language processing capabilities that the very most up-to-date models actually have. So the things were a bit more scripted, and some companies have actually moved away from it. So if you are among those, maybe it's worth actually checking out the new technology solutions now. If you're interested in maybe revisiting that, I think it's definitely worth looking at those because there has been some significant movement, particularly on the chatbot side of things. So this was candidate experience. The next one is obviously then looking at the efficiencies around the recruiter and the hiring manager experience. And also you can see here, many haven't really started to look at any of it yet. Or a few have maybe started to consider it, and few have actually started to really use it. The areas that they have used it in are obviously ones which are what I would consider the quick wins around creating job descriptions, improving maybe some interview questions. Those are the early use cases that we are seeing. And definitely that is something which is also not so difficult to kind of implement because it's not necessarily something where you have, I don't know, a works council or have very serious GDPR concerns, because it's more about the job. So it's an easier use case. And actually the vendors also have started to implement mostly around that kind of use case. I think if you ask ChatGPT, how can AI help recruiting, that is also still the number one answer that it will give. Funny enough, there was obviously on social media, there were obviously some posts around that very early days in 23. And actually that has made it through now into the solutions, and people are starting to adopt it. And are they finding it useful? Are they finding it helpful? Excuse me. And yes, they do, right? So you do find better conversion rates from AI generated job descriptions. So companies that have implemented a bit of an A/B test kind of thing actually can prove that there is better conversion rates between visitors to applications. There's also obviously more nuanced audiences that you can approach with it, tailor the language to be a bit more appealing to females and so on. Those kind of things definitely are important, and also save recruiters a lot of time, right? Because you can certainly create those job descriptions more effectively and more quickly nowadays. I think the other thing definitely which is important to look at is onboarding and interview scheduling. So that is also something what companies have found really quite effective. And it also obviously has provided significant benefits for recruiter and hiring manager experience, because it obviously cuts out a lot of the administrative hurdles that maybe are surrounded by, you know, going back and forth between candidate and hiring manager. And if you have an interview panel, the thing gets even more complicated, right? So this is where these tools actually are really strong and powerful and can help and automate a lot of that. There's even more autonomous solutions coming onto the market, maybe where you have, I don't know, if you have an interview scheduled for tomorrow, then you could even have an AI agent nowadays that goes out and, you know, calls or messages the candidate automatically to make sure that they actually like are reminded about tomorrow and actually get a chance to reconfirm that they will be attending, to improve show rates on those interviews, right? It's particularly obviously if you're maybe in a like a retail situation and hiring on the shop floor, that's really, or in the retail shop floor, that's really important. So that was a lot to cover, I guess. John, why don't you kick us off with some questions?
Sure. Thank you very much, Sven. We have a question from, or a comment, an observation from Romuald, who says, surprised to see that the EU AI Act is not appearing in the list of challenges for AI adoption.
Yeah, obviously. So, I mean, those were the top 6, right? So it's obviously only, and the infographics have more details, but it's definitely something where companies now need to think and track and log what AI solutions they have and how they assess those. So there are quite a few requirements that companies have to meet, and they actually have quite an impact on it. So I know from talking to a couple of companies quite recently on a roundtable, actually, that this is actually imminently happening, that they have to kind of go through that process now of cataloging things out. And certainly it is something where you, from an implementation perspective, certainly need to have, you know, your legal team on board, your IT team on board. So it's not something that you can, like, you know, implement an AI solution like that if you take it seriously and do a thorough assessment. There are companies who are taking shortcuts and are maybe not bothered by that as much, but those are not in Germany for sure, right? So I think, this is what I meant earlier, right? So there's obviously this hurdle around, you know, making sure that, and how you have to ask the vendors, how do you make sure that what are the measures you put in place that the AI is bias free and doesn't introduce additional bias? And also from your own usage of such a solution, you also kind of need to track that a little bit, and monitor and manage that quite professionally, I think. So yeah, definitely something that people have on the radar, even if it wasn't showing on the top 6. Good observation, Rom. Thank you.
Thank you, Sven. Everybody do get your questions in, put them in the chat pane. Make sure the drop down is ticked to everyone so we can see it. I've got a question around, so it's quite interesting to see that recruitment agencies are declining in popularity, and social channels are increasing in terms of how you're sourcing candidates. Do you think that social channels will be an adequate substitute? I mean, it seems like a very noisy environment, shall we say?
Yeah. So there's obviously, from a technology perspective, quite a few vendors who now do programmatic social media advertising that can actually drive traffic to jobs quite automatically. And as you were able to see on one of the slides, programmatic advertising is actually one of the things that they found quite effective in terms of outcome. But certainly there is a question about for which roles and for which kind of hiring types do you do this? So the agency business obviously continues to have legs, and companies do still rely on it, but certainly they are also under pressure from AI and also from those programmatic tools. But definitely, it's media spend has also gone down, right? So it's obviously if you have less jobs to advertise on, say, on job boards, obviously you don't need to spend as much with the job board providers as well, right? So this is just the normal curve that, in a downturn that the market goes through, probably every downturn, right? So this is not necessarily something particularly new, but this programmatic piece is actually quite a big shift. There's also in the industry quite some talk around moving from shifting the cost model around it quite significantly from maybe to a cost per application model rather than a cost per click or for a cost per week or month of advertising a job ad on a board. So there's some on how that is being invoiced to the customer and how the customers derive value from it is changing quite significantly through the AI being introduced in some of those processes. So I think that is actually a really big opportunity also to look at some cost savings there from a corporate perspective for sure, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. Also a question around sticking on the AI theme. 70% say that AI won't affect headcount in future. That seems remarkably high to me.
Yeah, so I think there's a general sentiment around we still want human in the loop, right? So there's very few organizations who would kind of think that they could automate all of their recruitment completely and give it all to an AI. There are, however, a few companies who think, or a few TA teams actually also that think, okay, we can shift a few more of the administrative tasks, maybe the interview scheduling, maybe those, phone calls to make sure that people show up on the day of the interview. Those are things we can actually automate quite well. And certainly there is, for a large organization that is doing this through a talent acquisition operations team or a bigger recruitment center, there's obviously potential for headcount savings, right? There is certainly the impact on the talent acquisition teams when companies, there has been some impact on talent acquisition teams last year on the headcount. This is also in the infographics, but not many have attributed that to AI alone. The attribution is still more to the general economic overall situation. Only 10%, I think, have said that they are attributing that to AI currently. So it is already starting, but there will certainly be more shifts coming, and everybody's like freaking out. Will we need recruiters still in the future? And obviously, I mean, humans still want to be interviewed by humans. And well, yeah, I mean, yeah. So, I mean, it depends on the role, right? If I'm a student, if I'm like, oh, I don't know, looking for to brush up my Christmas money, and I do a bit of a warehousing job or whatever, then I don't mind necessarily. But if it's for my full-time job, I want to know my team, my manager, build the relationship during the process and actually interact with a human being. And particularly in Europe, I think that is true. So I think what we are currently seeing is that more TA teams are looking actually to give recruiters more time to spend on interviews, and maybe reducing with the introduction of AI a lot of these administrative burdens, which take a long time to create the job description and write the interview questions and do all these more administrative tasks. So I think that's definitely possibly even an improvement, but certainly it does have potentially also already an impact on, or can have an impact on the headcount for sure.
But there's one thing that I read the other day about white fonting. Are you aware of this phenomenon, Sven?
White fonting? No, tell me what that is, John.
So I guess it feels to me a bit like a continuation of, weirdly enough, black hat SEO techniques where people used to keyword stuff, keywords onto the websites in fonts that you couldn't see. And so apparently candidates are now doing this to bypass applicant tracking systems where they'll put
Okay.
keywords of the job title that they want to go for in a white font on their application, which so ATSs will pick them up and put them to the top of the list of however many people. Is that something
Yeah.
you experienced or?
Yeah, I mean, that is one example of, I mean, these AI tools are also available for the candidates. And I'm sure we have all seen these videos where, you know, they have been sitting in front of a computer and answering questions, and you could see how the answers were, you know, prescribed by ChatGPT, or you have maybe seen somebody had an AI avatar doing an interview on his behalf while he was doing something else. You know, he was answering the interview questions, and it looked actually as if he was looking at the camera, but in fact he was doing something slightly different, right? So I think those kind of things are becoming possible. Certainly the CV is getting, there's a notion from the recruiters that this is getting sounding all a bit more like all the same stuff. So I think if the CV, I mean, it will continue to be an important thing that recruiters will look at, but the other assessment tools might be something that companies should be looking at, and also look at how applicants can use AI to actually influence and improve their scores on those tests and assessment tools. So I think that is the other thing. It's almost like these AI are battling it out, right? What you are saying is basically you're making the CV a bit more beautiful so that the AI actually gives you a higher score, right? And I think that is certainly something which, you know, these technology providers certainly need to be aware of and can find solutions for it as well. But certainly it is something, you know, there is still a strong case for a human in the loop on the interviews, and also maybe looking at some other assessment tools which are maybe a bit more skills based. And I know of a lot of companies who have already got rid of the cover letter maybe entirely, because that, you know, is really something that Gen AI can tailor to the job description very easily. And where in the past it was maybe just checking if the person could actually write a proper sentence and not have too many typos and grammar mistakes or whatever, like I would have in English. But, you know, those kind of things certainly also the recruiting teams need to be aware of. But I mean, we want people that can use these tools, right? So on the other hand, do you want to disqualify them just because they can use those new innovative tools that you actually want them to use potentially to drive your business or the business of your company forward, right? So I think that's definitely something which you also need to weigh in. So don't be overly too protective about it, probably.
Another question I had was around being a top employer. 52% are focusing on being a top employer. I wondered if you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, employer branding and obviously being seen as somebody who is taking care of the employees, has a good culture, a strong sense of belonging is really important to attract candidates in a still, I mean, it's still a tight market in many fields. The demographic is playing against most of the European economies. So like Germany has a widely aging workforce, the UK as well to a big degree, France as well. So I think you need to be seen as somebody who's trustworthy. People want to apply to that. So there's obviously continued investment in that, and that has obviously some cost associated with it because some of the things are not for free. It takes effort to do these kind of things. There are also actually some AI solutions that companies have infused into that, like, I don't know, maybe responding to Glassdoor posts a bit through Gen AI, or those kind of things is what we've seen as well. So I think it is also interesting to track a little bit what is happening around that as well, for sure. But particularly in those more blue collar frontline worker kind of industries, how you treat people, the economic pressures are high, inflation was high, the wages maybe didn't make those high jumps. So people are easily moving away from an employer, right, who is not focused on that and not obviously making that a big priority. So that can be a big risk as well.
Thank you, Sven. Question about candidate relationship management.
Yeah.
One of the comments in the infographics is that the tech world's very fragmented, the recruitment tech world, and possibly one thing that you should be doing is standardizing candidate relationship management. But how would that be possible? It seems quite difficult.
Yeah, well, I mean, it depends a little bit on the technology that you're using. So there's obviously and this is maybe on one of the other infographics we actually haven't discussed so much. So obviously, thank you for the question. But so the candidate relationship management functionality in the bigger suites, HR suites in that sense, is still relatively young and probably needs to mature a little bit more for quite a few providers. So depending on what system you have underpinning as your core, you might not have a strong candidate relationship management offering and might have a solution that you want to be putting on top of that. And then this whole candidate traction piece, we have seen in the past year also many companies actually trying to consolidate and bring that more onto one platform. The career side, the CRM, maybe the programmatic advertising, the job distribution. So if you have fewer solutions, then you can also meet your IT goals of those guys asking you to reduce spend and budget and obviously do more with less IT spend as well. So I think from that perspective, we've seen a bit of consolidation in the whole upper part of the recruitment funnel, where CRM is a big part of. But actually, it's an area where many companies are finding good, strong success with if they introduce it. So I think from that perspective, definitely something to look into if you haven't used it. Even if you're a smaller or mid-sized kind of company, it does need a little bit of a different thinking maybe around attracting candidates and how you keep the relationship going and keep them engaged. So I think that is not the post and pray approach that we have seen for many, many years. So you need to do things differently. But when you make that shift organizationally, then actually it can pay off quite significantly and also reduce cost and reduce time to hire.
Oh, I was on mute. Classic. Chatbots are still in high demand, it seems. But I was wondering, from what I've read, it seems like computing power is leveling off, or at least innovation's leveling off based on where different LLMs can get to with innovation, with speed and everything like that. So do you think this is going to still be the case in 12 months' time? Will chatbots still be in similar high demand or not?
Yeah, I think companies are obviously looking to be more 24/7 able to answer questions of candidates that they may have. And in the past, those chatbots were maybe a little bit more scripted than they are today, right? So what that means was that you had to actually put a lot of implementation effort in to actually make sure that you had all the you had to foresee all the questions that a candidate might have asked. And so that obviously limited, in the end, what those were in reality able to do. So hence, some companies have maybe actually gone away from using them. But now with those large language models, I think it's actually, they're seeing a bit of a renaissance and companies are actually looking towards using them more. we are seeing also that there's maybe more autonomous communication possible between an AI and a candidate in certain parts of the early stages of the process, where maybe in the past you've only captured the email address of a candidate, and then you can use the AI to follow up and ask the CV. So that obviously drives down the need for manual intervention by recruiters potentially, or automations to be scripted manually in the ATS or in the CRM. I think from that perspective, definitely something where AI can have a strong effect, and those chatbots actually are seeing a lot of innovation currently with, with all the co-pilots and, those kind of things being introduced into wider HR solutions as well. They don't necessarily have that candidate experience piece, so it's probably still a bit more dedicated to have that on the career side. But we're seeing it infused in quite a lot of career websites.
Elsewhere on the AI side, scalability as well. It seems scalability is still quite important. Could you talk about that a bit more as well?
Yeah, I mean, so scalability obviously means in terms of the technology, it needs to give answers quickly to a lot of candidates, and it actually has really quite strong scalability if the infrastructure that the vendor has put in place is strong. Then they can actually, do things in parallel which otherwise you couldn't do with humans almost, right? Because they can spin up agents and tasks that do things quite autonomously. So I think from that perspective, scalability is there. The vendors who have implemented generative AI obviously had a big challenge around making sure that this is actually in a safe environment, that obviously no data was exposed to train publicly available models, so that there needs to be this privacy layer around it. So that was one of the big things that vendors had focused on at first. And then obviously they need to think about redundancy. So I just read on my news here on my phone just prior to the webinar that we actually had ChatGPT had a global, wasn't reachable or anything, right? So if that is the case, and if your candidates to some degree rely on maybe the chatbot or whatever, then certainly this is not good, right? So the vendors also need to think about redundancy and make sure that they have a redundant system. So if they're using OpenAI and if ChatGPT is not available, maybe they have another secondary large language model, maybe an open source model that they then can shift over and use as an intermediate kind of solution. And when OpenAI spins back up, then they have something else. So I think from a scalability perspective, obviously that is important. And yeah, the companies are investing a lot in obviously making it more scalable. But yeah.
I think we've got time for one more question, Sven. So this is around candidate feedback. From the research, 37% are using candidate feedback. Should that be more? It feels like it should. If you're going to be a top employer, then kind of involving the hires in the process more seems like.
Well, you should probably provide feedback to every candidate that applies, right? So
But I guess more integral to your process of.
yeah, so I mean, yeah, so it's definitely that companies are looking to do more of that, and wanting to provide candidates with feedback is really, I think, really important if you want to keep them engaged. Oftentimes you have a second best or third best candidate that you want to keep engaging with, maybe not for this particular opportunity, but maybe 2 months, 3 months down the line, there's another opportunity that you can offer them. So I think being on good terms at all times with every candidate that has ever applied, is really a good idea, right? And a lot of companies have maybe not done such a good job of that in the past, but certainly technology can actually help you quite significantly with that nowadays. So definitely something, if your current setup doesn't allow for that, probably go to your vendor and ask what they can do or have maybe invested in over the past couple of months and years to improve it. and provide solutions.
Thank you very much, Sven. We're just going to get the slides back up to wrap up. Yeah, I mean, we've got 5 infographics all up on the website, fosway.com. There's the URL there. You can always go to the Knowledge Center, which is where you can find everything, not just talent acquisition realities related, but everything else to do with TA, the 9 grids, all the viewpoint papers, blog posts, everything related to TA, and all the broadly the 5 kind of segments that we cover here at Fosway. Also, just to talk about corporate membership, again, for inside access to more detailed research, benchmark reports, private corporate roundtables, analyst time, Fosway's accelerated buying support to align stakeholders, solution strategy, and everything you can see there. One final thing I'd like to talk about as well, which is a project for 2025, which we kind of kicked off late last year, is strategic research into AI and HR and AI and learning. Sven, I think it's probably best if I hand it over to you briefly to talk about this.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much interest in AI, and like in every conversation with corporates, it comes up like after 2 minutes, and also from the vendor side, in every briefing we see everybody introduces us. So there's so much noise, obviously, and it's growing exponentially, and buyers are really interested in trying to understand the implications it has on their teams, on their operating model, those kind of things, on the cost, like these things do come with a cost, right? And who covers that? And I think those are questions that we want to be investigating much more deeply in the strategic research project, and providing, obviously, for corporate some like benchmarking opportunities. Where are you, helping you develop some of the plans of moving forward and taking you on that journey. I think, don't think of AI implementation into any sub-function of HR, TA obviously being maybe only one of them, but an important one. Don't think of it as just as a one-off project. This is not something that you do like over the next, whatever, 6-8 months or something. It is because the innovation in the space is still so high, and people are still experimenting with a lot of things. And some of the legal frameworks and some of the ISO certification are still being formed. So it is a good idea probably to go in now that the solutions actually have matured a little bit. If you want to be the fastest innovator, you can, but certainly those are maybe some of the questions that we want to be helping companies actually make sense and often and help them to take good decisions for their organization. So it does cover all areas, talent acquisition, skills, internal mobility, learning, but also the wider HR, service desk, those kind of things. So we're looking at that very deeply and inviting you, obviously, to participate in that. So I think it's a big opportunity, also for your own personal branding and your own, like, this is an area of innovation where you don't want to be missed out, I guess. So definitely important to do something about it.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Sven. This Ask the Analyst session will be up on site. It will also be up on our YouTube channel very, very soon. It just remains for me to say thank you, Sven, for your time. Fascinating stuff. The research cycle for TA Realities 2025 is going to start before you know it. Until then, thank you to everyone for joining, and we'll see you for another Fosway Ask the Analyst session. Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good day.